As you all know, Bryan Kohberger is having the time of his life in prison.
Bryan Kohberger says he's being kept awake behind bars by non-stop taunts from the other inmates. Inmates are taking turns targeting Kohberger.
Okay, maybe not so much at all. So why is life in prison without the possibility of parole sometimes worse than the death penalty? We're going to break down the psychological reality of both to reveal why life in prison can be a much harsher punishment, especially for someone like Bryan Kohberger. Now, let's get started. Bryan Kohberger is serving life in prison without the possibility of parole. Although some may view this as the lesser, more merciful sentence compared to execution, it may not actually be.
This is hell on earth. It's the prison where Bryan Kohberger will spend the rest of his life in solitary confinement, locked in his cell 23 hours a day. Meals are slid through slots in the door.
The death penalty delivers intense stress over a relatively short period. In psychology, one of its main effects is called anticipatory anxiety, the ongoing mental strain of knowing a major life event is coming, but not knowing when that's exactly going to happen. Every appeal, every scheduled execution date triggers heightened arousal in their sympathetic autonomic nervous system, which often results in their body being in constant flight or fight mode. This cycle can cause significant distress on them, but it's time limited because once the sentence is finally carried out, that negative experience ends. However, life in prison without the possibility of parole produces a unique profile of psychological distress and harm. Instead of shorter-term acute stress, it creates unrelenting chronic stress stretching over many decades. What do you think happens when every single day reminds that prisoner that they will never leave? They may see others leave and get parole, but they're never leaving. Yes, their brain adapts by shifting into a state of learned helplessness, where any motivation they had to do really anything just completely erodes, and complete hopelessness becomes the default. In psychology, the absence of control over their environment amplifies stress responses and steadily erodes their resilience. When every detail of their life, from meals to movement to social contact, is dictated by authority, the prisoner's autonomy and self-determination vanishes. Especially over time, prisoners like Kohberger stop trying to improve their circumstances, where they become convinced that no action will make a difference. This collapse of agency fosters emotional withdrawal, hopelessness, and a diminished sense of identity, compounding the long-term psychological damage of incarceration. This severe chronic stress is not only linked to depression and anxiety, but also to memory impairments and physical health decline, which is one reason why those in prison don't live very long. And over time, they experience institutionalization.
Institutionalized. In here, he's an important man. Outside, he's nothing. But I'm telling you, these walls are funny. First you hate them, and you get used to them. Enough time passes, you get so you depend on them.
One thing I learned from Schaik from a very young age, everyone is innocent in prison.
Everybody in here is innocent. And you know that? Hey, what you in here for?
Didn't do it. I ain't supposed to be here. You don't understand. I'm not supposed to be here.
Open that cell.
For high-profile prisoners like Bryan Kohberger, additional stressors compound these effects. Prisoners may intentionally target them for harassment, such as disrupting their sleep through persistent noise or verbal abuse.
Kohberger's fellow hardcore offenders are going out of their way, as far as they can, to make the notorious newcomer miserable. They are taking turns and shouting through the air ducts all day long and all night long to keep Bryan Kohberger from being able to sleep.
Sleep deprivation is well documented in psychological research. What do you think happens when the body is denied deep restorative sleep night after night? Right, their emotional regulation collapses, his irritability spikes, and his cognition begins to fragment.
They got together and said, okay, well, how do we harass this guy? Facility as a whole, concrete acoustic chamber.
Prolonged sleep loss can cause hallucinations, disorganized thought patterns, and significant deficits in impulse control.
They're utilizing the vent system, they're kicking the doors, they're taunting him, torturing him through using psychology.
I'll introduce you around, make you feel right at home. I know a couple of big old bull that just love to make your acquaintance.
When combined with ongoing verbal hostility, the nervous system remains in a constant state of hyperarousal, preventing recovery and intensifying mental strain. Could you stay mentally stable if you never got a full night's sleep for years?
The inmates apparently were waiting for him. And when he got there, they are now making his life absolutely miserable.
Fresh want my mother.
In Bryan Kohberger's case, another factor that's likely to intensify the psychological toll is his reported obsessive-compulsive fixation on cleanliness and order. What do you think happens when someone whose coping depends on strict rituals suddenly loses the ability to perform them? Right, their structure that once kept their intrusive thoughts at bay collapses almost instantly. We see Bryan Kohberger apparently attempting to satisfy his compulsive need for order through repetitive cleaning motions and organization. In psychology, obsessive-compulsive disorder, or OCD, is maintained by a cycle of intrusive thoughts and compulsive behaviors intended to reduce their anxiety. As you can imagine, prisons disrupt this cycle entirely. The inability to control his environment, from cell sanitation to shared facilities, means he cannot reliably perform the cleaning rituals that previously helped him manage his distress. This loss of ritual control increases intrusive thoughts, heightens anxiety, and can trigger a physiological stress response in his sympathetic division of his autonomic nervous system. And what do you think happens when compulsions are blocked long-term, year after year? Right, his brain will adapt in the most punishing way possible. It becomes trapped in a state of unrelenting preoccupation with contamination fears, hypervigilance, and spiraling stress, which is all layered on top of the psychological weight of life without parole.
He's in a cell 23 hours a day and is taken in shackles to exercise inside a cage for 1 hour each day.
Sometimes prisons respond to potential physical harassment by placing those high-profile prisoners into solitary confinement, like Bryan Kohberger, where he is in his cell alone for 23 hours a day. While this may remove the immediate physical threat from other prisoners, it replaces it with the psychological torment of isolation. Extended solitary confinement like that has been shown to cause sensory deprivation, disorientation, and an increased risk of depression and suicidal ideation. For some, the lengthy absence of social contact is as damaging as the harassment itself. There is empirical psychological research that supports the conclusion that life without the possibility of parole can be more psychologically damaging than a death sentence. But why do you think that is? Yes, these studies have found that prisoners serving life terms without parole report higher rates of hopelessness, chronic depression, and suicidal thoughts compared to those on death row. The continuous erosion of their mental health for decades can represent a more profound form of suffering than the short-term distress of waiting for an execution. Yes, it seems that Bryan Kohberger gravely underestimated what prison was going to be like for him.
They don't see him as a welcomed guest in their house, and that's how they see it. This is their facility. The corrections officers is just make sure that he's not physically harmed. They can't control the psychological aspect of this.
Life without parole is often presented as a humane alternative to the death penalty. However, Bryan didn't seem to take into account that everyone's experience in prison can vary drastically. This can especially be the case with how high profile the prisoner is, and also what type of crime they committed.
What?
Someone like Bryan, who's extremely high profile and who's also the scum of the earth, yeah, he's going to have a really rough time in prison.
Your fellow inmates are anxiously awaiting your arrival.
There are about 32 inmates apparently in the J block currently. They are the worst of the worst.
In a maximum security lockdown, these guys would all be the worst of the worst, but I guess you can always be worse.
In Kohberger's case, his sentence ensures he will likely remain under constant confinement for the rest of his life, subjected to ongoing stressors that may include verbal harassment, disrupted sleep, and constant isolation.
The inmates have come up with a creative idea in harassing him to the point where, you know, it's basically driving him crazy.
In psychology, decades of exposure to these conditions create a predictable trajectory of mental decline. Phase 1, the early years, 1 through 5. This is the hardest adjustment period. The body is struck in survival mode, with their stress system running nonstop, high cortisol, constant hypervigilance, and jumpy reactions to every sound. Many prisoners can't stop replaying the crime in their head and the circumstances of how they were caught.
I also later noticed what appeared to be a tan leather knife sheath laying on the bed. The Idaho State Lab later located a single source of male DNA, suspect profile, left on the button snap of the knife sheath.
They may regret, in Bryan's case, pleading guilty.
Yes, 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 yes.
Think about the sentencing.
I respectfully decline.
And obsessing over what they've lost, which fuels their anger and despair. Noise, harassment, and rigid prison schedules wreck normal sleep cycles, making it harder for them to think clearly or regulate their emotions. Early on, family and maybe some friends still visit and write, but over time those letters slow, the calls taper off, and the first cracks of abandonment appear. Phase 2, the middle years, 5 to 15 years. With time, many sink into learned helplessness, that feeling that nothing they do will change anything. Any confidence that they ever had going into prison completely is eroded, and they stop believing their actions matter. By this stage, institutionalization begins to set in. Speech, habits, even thought patterns begin to mirror prison culture. Their prior social skills begin to wither from that isolation, and emotionally a dull, flattening affect takes over. It's a kind of numbness that psychologically protects against constant hopelessness. Their mental processing speed and focus decline without any stimulation, and by now in this phase, most loved ones drifted away almost completely. Phase 3, the later years. 15 to 30 plus years. Decades of being in that stressful environment begin to show. Chronic cortisol exposure can shrink memory centers in their brain, making recall and concentration harder. That endless monotony of prison life dulls sensory processing, leaving many confused or detached. Their identity narrows to a bare focus on just survival, while their despair grows stronger as future milestones just vanish. There's nothing to look forward to. Long stretches of solitary, such as with Bryan Kohberger, only worsen it, warping time, blurring reality, and leaving emotions unrecognizable even to themselves. This is because a large part of our emotional development comes from our interaction with other people. Yet take those interactions away and you really start to strip someone of their emotions. At this point, nearly all outside connections are gone. Visits have stopped, letters never come, and the world moves on as if they never existed. Yes, Bryan will probably still get his sick hybristophilia love letters even 30 plus years out, but they will slow down significantly. The common psychological thread is a lack of control. Control is one of the strongest buffers against stress, and without it, the mind steadily breaks down. Pleasure fades, the brain's ability to adapt weakens, and over the years, this leads to not just suffering, but to real declines in impulse control, decision making, and the ability to connect with others. From a psychological perspective, this is why life without parole is sometimes considered harsher than the death penalty. Execution ends acute distress abruptly. Life without parole sustains and compounds it over decades, degrading cognition, identity, and emotional stability until little remains of the person who first entered the prison.
They send you here for life, that's exactly what they take. Part that counts anyway.
When I first started in this forensic psychology field, I had a mentor that told me that prison is punishment. That's what it is. It's not supposed to be you're just removed from society, but no, it's supposed to be bad. It's supposed to suck. It's prison. That's the whole point. Whether you agree with that or not, in the American justice system, that's what it is. Now in the comments, what do you think about the sentence of life in prison? Do you think it should be given often as a deterrent, or do you think maybe we should be more like Canada, where convicts have to be reviewed after a certain amount of time? Let everyone know in the comments below. Subscribe for more. Yeah, I think Bryan Kohberger completely underestimated prison. If this becomes a thing of the prisoners making Bryan Kohberger's life a living hell for years and years and even decades, I think Bryan Kohberger is seriously going to be regretting that decision to take the plea deal. So if you were initially discouraged that Bryan Kohberger got a plea deal, you can rest assured that his life is a living hell right now. Many more videos to come. See you next time.